Letty slipped off her driving shoes and eased her feet into a pair of grey suede court shoes. Most of the other women wore some form of trainer, but Letty had privately vowed never to do so. To her mind, the elegant proportions of the Regency building before her demanded a similar presentation on her part. And she had always enjoyed choosing clothes and selecting outfits. Today, she wore one of her favourite tweed suits in muted, heathery tones, with a silk scarf which she arranged neatly underneath her lanyard. She wondered where she would be that day. She walked around to the side of the house, smiled to the girls at the tills, and experienced the familiar thrill of entering the secret code to enter the unobtrusive door in the bookshop. 10:02. The fact that it was also her birthday always made her feel that she belonged here. Once upstairs in the volunteer staff room, her first glance was at the whiteboard. The chapel in the morning and the drawing room in the afternoon. Her spirits lifted immediately. The chapel was dark and gloomy, and the last room on the tour, so that visitors were usually tired and rarely wanted to hear many details. But the drawing room was her absolute favourite room because of the portraits. In the beginning, the portraits had posed the greatest challenge: to memorise the names and dates of all 11 marquises since the title was first bestowed by George III. Letty used to recite them as she drove along until they became as real to her as her own relatives. In fact, more so, since she could only trace them back as far as her great-grandparents. And from the first day, her favourite marquis had been the fifth. His soulful brown eyes, high Regency collar, snowy cravat, were all reminiscent of the heroes of her favourite romantic novelist, Georgette Heyer. But he was a real person. Whereas newly retired, Letty had tackled tomes of sociology and found them dull beyond words. Nowadays, she found that reading biographies of the house's inhabitants made social history fascinating. The fifth, as she privately called him, had campaigned to abolish slavery and had treated his tenant farmers well. She looked forward to the afternoon. The other volunteers had all arrived by now, and there was a hum of conversation in the staff room. "Can I sign you up to the Christmas lunch?" one called, and Letty smiled and nodded. The house manager read out the notices for that day and then led them down the stairs and along the servants' corridor of grey linoleum to the private door which led into the house. As they passed each room, the volunteer guides peeled off one by one until only Letty was left, and she went into the chapel. As she set her handbag down on the chair provided beside the information folder, a leaflet fluttered out, triggering memories of her very first visit to the property. Her landlady, Mrs. Pope, had invited Letty on her church ladies' outing, and Letty had been delighted to expand her horizons after retirement. After the incessant chatter of the other ladies on the coach and around the house, it had been bliss to sit here quietly in the chapel while they repaired to the cafe for a strong cup of tea and a scone. On her way out, Letty had lifted this same leaflet, appealing for volunteer guides. But with no transport of her own, it had seemed an impossible dream. However, Letty had kept it, using it as a bookmark. Remembering Mrs. Pope on that visit, vigorous and opinionated, contrasted sharply with Letty's final memories of her, feeble and incapacitated, but still retaining her strong personality. "I'd be lost without you, Letty, my dear," she had said quietly one evening as she patted the hand that was tucking the bedclothes around her. "And I certainly wouldn't still be in my own home." Letty knew it was true. What had begun by grocery shopping and collecting prescriptions after a fall had expanded to include personal care and cheering of spirits. The two women had grown closer over the elder's final year, and Letty had mourned Mrs. Pope sincerely when she died. She had been preparing to pack up and look for another lodging when the solicitor's letter arrived, informing her that she had been left Mrs. Pope's house and half of her finances, the other half to go to foreign missions. Letty's amazement was only equalled by the rector's disappointment. He had confidently expected a large legacy, but his decision to remove church pews for a creche had been only the beginning. Mrs. Pope had protested unsuccessfully against his removal of more pews for a tea and coffee station, and when he cleared another corner of the church for a praise band, she had gone to her solicitor the very next day and changed her will. So the rector's loss had become Letty's gain. Part of that gain was the smart little Minnie outside in her favourite French navy with cream leather seats. It was quietly satisfying to park it outside Marjorie's house beside her old Morris 1000, which was looking decidedly shabby. The rest of the proceeds of the house sale had secured for Letty a well-appointed flat further out in the leafy suburbs. And with her own transport, the prospect of becoming a volunteer guide in an historic house had become a possibility. Letty's new chapter had begun. That day there were few visitors, but there were two whom Letty was expecting. Two of her old colleagues from the office, Edwin and Norman. Letty looked forward to their visit with some trepidation, for she felt almost a different woman to the person who had shared their office for all those years. And yet when they walked into the chapel, it was as if she had left them only yesterday. They were so very much what they had always been. Edwin sniffed the air disappointedly. No incense? He seemed dissatisfied with Letty's explanation that the family held a communion service there once a month and turned over some prayer books. Not very high, he remarked. You've smartened yourself up a bit, commented Norman, not altogether pleasantly. It isn't hard to see where the money's going. Letty felt herself flush. Norman had always been capable of a snide remark, and she was grateful when Edwin said smoothly, "Oh, Letty was always elegantly turned out. I always said so." Norman gave a surreptitious kick to the wheel of a mobility scooter parked outside the chapel door. "What about lunch?" he demanded. "I'm fed up traipsing about." Letty explained that she had to wait for another guide to come, but promised to join them in the cafe as soon as she could. When she took the third seat at their table, the men had reached the coffee stage. Edwin passed round his bag of jelly babies, but Letty declined because she still felt that sweets were a dangerous indulgence. Norman accepted one and then made a fuss about having to suck it. More dental work. Letty felt faintly revolted. Lunch with the fifth Marquis would have been a very different affair. A discussion about affairs of the day over a glass of ratafia. She said her goodbyes and made her way to the drawing room. There he stood, her Marquis, brown hair, greying at the temples, curling slightly over his collar, a clear, rather amused gaze, and a full curve to the lips which suggested an enjoyment of life in all its quirks and oddities. After so many months of research, Letty felt she would have been equal to a dinner party conversation with him. The portrait beside his was of his wife, whose softly waving brown hair was not unlike Letty's own, she having resisted the lemming-like rush of her contemporaries to the ubiquitous perm. By all accounts, they had been a devoted couple, and Letty usually read aloud the facsimile of a letter he had written his wife from abroad. There was a strain of instability in some men of the family. Letty knew exactly which men in which portraits had ended up mad and sometimes violent as a result, but not the fifth Marquis. An admirable man. A man, in fact, like no one that Letty had ever met in real life. Sometimes on quiet days, she fantasized about a wrinkle in time, allowing her to share a moment with him across the centuries, such as Miss Jourdain and Miss Moberly were said to have experienced at Versailles. She was constructing just such a daydream when the raucous voices of women dragged her back to the present. A gaggle of 6 women in late middle age, all in white cardigans and with stiff helmets of hair, were studying a display case of 19th century engraved crystal. "I got a lot of that stuff as wedding presents," remarked one. "But who wants it nowadays?" "Not me," chimed her friend, and they quickly passed along to the next room, more interested in sharing their own prejudices and criticisms of the house and its occupants than of learning anything new. Letty had learned not to try and engage such visitors. The afternoon wore on. Parents with small children had a very finite space of time before the children became bored, so Letty stuck to the most important and interesting points. 2 wiry little men with links to the racing world wanted to know every detail of the Stubbs painting. An American with a gnat-like carrying voice, accompanied by a diffident Englishman, protested loudly that women could not inherit the title. "But Jimmy," he declared, "it's so primitive." A family with a wheelchair-bound grandmother, reminiscent of Mrs. Pope, received Letty's special attention and best anecdotes. She received their thanks, reflecting on how satisfying and useful these days felt in comparison with all her years at the office. Those times, they felt like a dream now, as if they had never happened. The flow of visitors slackened, and 20 minutes remained. The November afternoon darkened. The house quietened. Letty took advantage of the lull to take a seat and to flick through the file of information in the drawing room. It never did any harm to refresh your memory. But the binder was old and had been dropped once too often. The mechanism burst, and all the laminated sheets scattered over the wooden floor. Letty crouched there, ready to gather them up, when a voice above her asked, "May I help?" Letty looked up into the face of the 5th Marquis. Brown eyes, brown hair, greying at the temples, lips curved in a pleasant smile. For a long moment she crouched there, simply staring. Then she realised that his hair was more grey than brown, and that his jacket was tweed. But his eyes were brown, and his lips did curve upwards. By now he had collected all the pages and was handing them to her. Letty stuffed them carelessly into the file and gave this visitor her full attention. Each year for his birthday, he set aside 1 week and visited as many places of historic interest as he could. Letty admired the interest that this showed in the personality it revealed. To plan and enjoy solo travel, she found it inspiring. With 15 minutes left, Letty took her visitor round the portraits chronologically, tracing their progress through marriage, money, and politics. When she talked about the 5th Marquis, her eyes glowed with enthusiasm, and her visitor exclaimed, "You're clearly passionate about this place." "I feel I know them now. Thank you." "Lettuce," he said, angling his head to read her lanyard. "Lettuce. That's an historic name, isn't it? It suits you." Suddenly a bell rang, indicating that the house was about to close. There was no more time. "You really have brought the house and the family to life for me," he said. "May I buy you a coffee in the cafe to say thank you?" Letty smiled and nodded. Life did indeed hold infinite possibilities for change. And this is my Marquis.